Hello, my name's Oliver Church, and I'm going to be talking to you today about something I call the ADHD Trifecta. So this is going to be the three most powerful symptoms that can negatively affect your quality of life or productivity unless you know how to manage them. So stay until the end of the video because number 3 is the most important one, and I'm also going to give you tips on how to manage that, which you absolutely should not miss. So starting with the first symptom is working memory. So the symptom itself is having a limited working memory. So let me start by explaining what working memory is. It's basically your short-term memory. So short-term memory of typical neurotypical people might be able to store anywhere from 3 to 5 pieces of information. For people with better memory, it could be up to 9 pieces. But for people with ADHD, it could be as low as 1 or 2. You're going to easily get distracted. Maybe after 20 or 30 seconds, you're only going to remember one thing from, say, a list of instructions that you were reading. So, to explain this symptom, it's difficulty holding multiple pieces of information in your mind. So that can lead to things like forgetting mid-task what you were doing. So maybe you were working on something in one room and then you walked into another room and you completely forgot what it is you were working on, which is crazy, right? But absolutely normal for people with ADHD. As many of my viewers will know, it can also be, as I just said, trouble following multi-step instructions. So why does it matter when you have this problem? Well, it can affect your ability to be productive and to complete tasks. You might end up not completing tasks because you basically forgot what it was you were doing. You could be halfway through doing something and then you don't remember how to finish that particular task. It can make you feel kind of dumb, even if you're very intelligent. You could be a very intelligent person with ADHD and still be kind of stuck with this problem. And what is the solution? You might be asking me, well, Oliver, what is the solution to this? I don't want to have this problem. Well, luckily for you, there's many solutions, and I'm going to give you a few of them that I like to use. So I like to think of it like this. Neurotypical people, they have a brain where they can fit more in. They might have like a bigger RAM available, you think in terms of computers, right? Maybe someone with ADHD has a very powerful CPU and a small memory bank. They can't remember as much in the short term, like a RAM memory. So we could try externalizing that memory. So let's say with a computer you have a hard disk, right? So we don't have that, but we could use physical aspects, elements, right? So maybe you could write down some notes. You could use those yellow sticky notes. You could write down a checklist. You could use whiteboards. You might want to get yourself a whiteboard in the office or at home. You might want to write down reminders, maybe either in a notebook or dotted around your office or around your house. They can remind you of important things that your brain may not remember. And I mean, this can actually help not only with, while you're working on a task. So while you're working on a task, I should say, you can make those notes that will help you. But in terms of long-term memory, which ADHD can affect too, then it can kind of help you with remembering or focusing on things that might be daily tasks. For example, when you're using a lot of these external prompts that neurotypical people may not need to rely on as much. So another solution is you could break a bigger project down into smaller chunks and then you have these micro steps, right? And then you could have clear outcomes for each step. So try to think of a logical method of breaking down that larger task into something that's achievable, because if you don't do this, you're more likely to procrastinate, because you don't want to think of it like you have this huge project, right? You have to basically climb Mount Everest. Now, you don't want to do that. Like, you don't want to wake up and think, okay, today I have to climb this huge mountain. But if your goal is not to climb to the top of the mountain, if your goal is like, okay, I just need to reach the first base, then that's a lot more manageable. So that's kind of what we're doing when we break down these bigger tasks. So that's going to stop overwhelming your short-term memory, because you don't need to have 100 things in your head. You just need to have maybe 1 or 2 small prompts of information that guide you in the direction that you need to go in, if that makes sense. So another way is you could use other kinds of memory aids like voice notes, mind maps, or memory palace techniques. So a mind map is when you have like one thing in the middle, could be an idea or a task, and then you have multiple aspects of that task that you've related to it, and you're gonna use that to kind of trigger your memory so that you don't have to keep all of that information in your mind necessarily. You could also gamify the result. So when you finish a micro task, give yourself a reward. Maybe have a cup of tea, maybe go check your social media, because people are addicted to social media, but if you can control it through strict usage, then I think you can still kind of have it in your day without it overwhelming your discipline, if that makes sense. And that actually leads us to the next chapter, which is low dopamine. So dopamine, if it's too low, you're going to end up feeling depressed, and this is an issue that a lot of people with ADHD have. It can affect their motivation. It can cause things like procrastination. So we don't want to have low dopamine. So low dopamine is a great topic because it's a good scientific segue that kind of connects the idea of working memory and the final topic we're going to discuss for number 3, which is your attention. And dopamine affects both. Like, if your dopamine is low, it might make your working memory worse, and it might make your attention worse. So we need to try to come up with strategies to manage and improve your dopamine levels. And how do we do that? Well, someone with an ADHD brain, they might naturally have less dopamine than a neurotypical person, something to do with having less dopamine receptors, or the way that the information or signals are kind of processed or sent to the prefrontal cortex. I think I read somewhere that there's less serotonin sent to the prefrontal cortex with this condition, so that might be a factor, and we need to really kind of manage it more strictly than typical people do. So having low dopamine can be tied to things like procrastination, where you're putting off doing a task because you might feel anxiety, or you might feel fear that doing the task will be so painful and depressing because you wouldn't get that dopamine hit that you want, or you have a fear of failure. Maybe you work on something for 100 hours and it ends up not having the result you want, and then you have a fear of the depressed feeling, or even lower dopamine, or even worse, depression than the baseline that you're feeling, which might already be low, causing you to have that anxiety and that procrastination towards doing things, which is a big factor with ADHD. So It can also lead to things like seeking stimulation. So you're going to seek a quick dopamine hit from things that are not necessarily healthy, maybe whether that's scrolling your phone or doom scrolling, for example, where you see things in other people's lives that are not going well. You feel better about your own terrible life where you feel depressed, but your life actually might be a lot better than you think it is, but your dopamine's not rewarding you enough, so you trick yourself into believing that you're unhappy when you're really probably happy if you can manage your dopamine a little bit better. It also leads to things like impulsivity, because you're constantly chasing that next dopamine hit, right? So you need to try to rewire your brain to get dopamine from things that are productive instead of things that are not going to add value to your life. So why does it matter? Well, it can make tasks feel boring and painful. If you're doing a difficult task and you're not getting any dopamine from it, you're not going to want to do that task, right? You're going to feel like, well, why would I want to do that? Because that's going to make me depressed. I'm already feeling a little bit depressed, but I feel a lot better when I'm scrolling on TikTok, so why don't I just do that instead, right? But if you stop doing those unhealthy activities, those addictive behaviors like binge watching, doom scrolling, maybe it's watching Netflix, right? Distracting your brain from things that you need to do by focusing on things that are easy and give you those quick dopamine hits. So the more you can cut down on those unhealthy mental activities, the more dopamine you're going to get from the healthy, productive activities, especially when you're breaking things down into micro steps like we've discussed, and as I'm going to discuss more on the third symptom. So the solution, as I've said, micro rewards. So rewarding yourself for every little step or every stage or every sub-step of a major task, you're going to feel better. And that could be a physical reward, a cup of coffee, could be walking around the block, or it could be a square of dark chocolate if you don't mind having some extra calories and you want to have, maybe you have a little bit of a sweet tooth, right? So other ways that you can manage your dopamine come down to how healthy your lifestyle is. So if you try to exercise more or try to get a little bit more sunlight, as long as you're wearing sun protection and not getting sunburned, right? Some people even say cold exposure. So if you're living in a hot country, you might want to sometimes take a cold shower. So going on to another aspect of what can damage your dopamine is task switching. If you're task switching too regularly, you're gonna trigger a worsening of your ADHD in some way. So if you're scrolling TikTok, for example, and what it can do is it can burn out your dopamine. So it's almost like you're switching tasks regularly and you're doing low quality actions or things, and what that can do is it can give you these little dopamine hits over and over again, and as you get these hits, you're basically going to be addicted to the idea of wanting to regularly switch tasks to new addictive behaviors, right? You might have 4 or 5 addictive behaviors or unhealthy behaviors that you do, or entertainment, right? Like things like Netflix or TikTok, or it could even be socializing, over socializing. And then when you get distracted, your brain is going to try to latch onto one of those easy things to kind of detract from a productive task that's going to give you dopamine for the right reasons. So another way to improve your dopamine is to make sure you're eating a healthy diet, eat plenty of protein-rich foods, make sure you're getting omega-3s, get some fruit and vegetables in your diet, try to eat more whole foods. I mean, this kind of thing we can probably discuss in another video. It's a very deep topic, but you want to try to avoid unhealthy foods like junk foods as much as you can, because they can spike your insulin, and that can make your ADHD symptoms worse. It can cause things like brain fog, right? So that's the dopamine chapter finished. So let's go on to the final chapter, the final symptom, and this is actually the most important one. So please don't click off the video, because you're going to get some even more useful tips in a few moments. And before we start this chapter, please do me a favor and smash up that like button and hit the subscribe to support my channel, so that I can keep bringing you this useful, important content that's going to really add value to your life. So number 3 is the inability to sustain attention or focus. When most people think of ADHD, they probably, a lot of people only know about this focus symptom. They don't know about a lot of the other more in-depth or less visible, less known symptoms. So it gets too much attention because people kind of forget the other symptoms are just as important, and that's why I put it last. I don't want you just watching this one chapter and then clicking off the video. So you need to really manage everything. So what is this symptom? So let's reframe it. So ADHD isn't really having a lack of focus, right? It's actually a lack of focus control. So controlling your ability to focus. So for example, if you improve your ability to focus, then you can start hyper-focusing on things that you love. And then you're going to basically not lose focus as much. So if you can try to find something to work on that you're passionate about, then you can maintain that hyper-focus better, because people with ADHD tend to focus better on things that they're interested in, because their brain stays attentive. So that brings me to the next aspect of focus, which is a lot of people in the productivity space like to refer to something called flow state. So flow state is when you get into a really kind of deep focus with your mind, and you're so focused and you have such good attention on the task that you're working on that nothing else around you is going to affect that, whether it's noise or whether it's, you know, being hungry, being thirsty, or your emotions. Your emotions are going to be a huge distraction, or not getting enough dopamine. So the way that you can try to enter this flow state, which is like a deep, immersive, focused state where time kind of disappears and feels, it should feel almost effortless. The way that you're going to do that is you want to, I believe, this is just my opinion, so you should try to do it either as soon as you wake up, or you have a cup of coffee and then you go straight to work. Or some people like to go do some exercise because that can boost your dopamine, and then like as soon as you get back to the office or you get back home, if you're working home, you can just jump straight into work, and then you're going to hit that flow state before distractions like other people or emotions, or, you know, it could be emails that are distracting you from the task you need to do. So ideally you want to put those most difficult tasks that require the most focus right at the start of your day, so that you can kind of do them while you enter this flow state. And I do believe that people with ADHD, if they become good at managing their symptoms, they can enter this flow state more easily than other people. And it's like a productive version of hyperfocus. So a lot of people know, like with ADHD, you can hyperfocus on things for a long period of time as long as your brain enjoys them. So if you can train your brain, you move from hyperfocus to flow state, and you're going to be enjoying and focused on your work. And I don't think that there is anything more meaningful in the world than being in flow state and enjoying and being able to focus and be super productive for a long period of time. And if you can get your brain into this position, I do believe your quality of life will improve. It will help you feel more competent, more engaged, and less scatterbrained. So how do you trigger flow state? So I would say try to match the task to the skill level that you have. If you have something that's way too difficult, your brain's gonna sabotage you. And then when you have that aspect figured out, if you have a very long task, try to break it down into steps, right? So if it's already manageable, then you just have to break it down into micro steps. But if it's too hard, then you might want to consider just kind of improving your knowledge or learning something new that's going to help you tackle that task better. So I'm not telling you to avoid difficult tasks, but I'm telling you that you need to start strategizing about how you approach these tasks, whether it's breaking them down or improving your ability to perform them. So another thing you can do is you might want to put on some headphones, maybe listen to some music to get you into that flow state, because that might help to prevent distractions, for example. You could also consider the Pomodoro method we talked about with working memory, where you kind of break things down into smaller tasks. Well, that can also improve your focus. So you could, for example, you could break a 25-minute work period into, sorry, that's wrong. So with Pomodoro, you work in 25-minute blocks and then you have 5-minute breaks. So you might want to consider scheduling that kind of system as a way to manage your focus. So try to stack interest with intention. So basically what that means is make sure that when you do some work for 25 minutes and then you have a break, try to make sure that the work you're doing has intention behind it. You're not just gonna go in and be like, okay, this is a work time, and you're just gonna be sitting there not knowing what to do because you haven't really stacked any kind of plan, or you haven't put some passion into it that's gonna give you the intention, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's kind of a convoluted way to look at it, but try to think of things in a deep or wide way, and then you'll be able to understand things from kind of multiple aspects, if that makes sense. And you could also consider tracking your progress, right? Maybe make a diary, so at the end of each day you're going to be tracking your performance of how long you entered flow state during that day. So maybe on day 1 you only managed to do flow state for an hour, but after a couple of weeks you were managing 4 hours every day and making huge progress. And then by tracking that progress, you're gonna give yourself more feedback to your brain, and then that's gonna help motivate you to keep going and keep working on this flow state method. A lot of people like to also use things like visual habit trackers, or productivity apps where you have like the thing where you grow your forest, right? I don't personally use those, but if that works for you, you might want to consider doing it. And the best time to enter flow state is another topic that we should discuss. So I think I already mentioned earlier in the video, but if you can enter flow state as soon as possible in the morning, maybe have get some sunlight to wake yourself up, then enter flow state. I said something about having a coffee, but I do believe the research, people say you should probably wait for a period of an hour or so before you have your first coffee. So yeah, make sure you're really attentive about when you do things and how distracted you are, but definitely try to enter that flow state either straight away or after some exercise in the morning. You can't always focus on what you need to. So if you're good at focusing, but you're focusing on things like TikTok or doom scrolling or playing a game or watching movies on Netflix, that's not productive and that's not healthy. And you might do it if you just do that for a very small period of time and it's not negatively affecting your life, then that's fine, right? But if you're spending more than a couple of hours a day doing unproductive activities, you might want to rethink your priorities and you might want to consider trying to be more disciplined with what you're doing. Otherwise it's going to lead to things like unfinished work, lost time, missed potential. You're missing out on your true potential. You're not utilizing your intelligence or your energy, and your energy is going into things that don't really matter and they're not going to add value to your life, which is going to create guilt and anxiety. So try to reframe your mind and believe in yourself, and don't think that you have a lack of focus. Try to approach your condition with a positive mindset. So it's just a lack of focus control, so that's within your control. So you can improve and you can train your brain to focus more deeply, to enter that hyperfocus state, to enter that flow state. And you can use all of these examples and methods to manage your symptoms that I've been giving you. So I hope you found this video useful, and please like and subscribe and put a comment down below. Tell me what you think of my content. It really means a lot to me, and I will try to reply to you, and I am planning to help people one-on-one with managing their symptoms. So if you want to talk to me, you can reach out to me by email. So thank you for watching this video, and please watch out for the next one because I'm going to have so much useful, interesting content. Thank you.